Welcome everybody to the March ORF meeting. This is interesting topic area because this is really a follow-up on something that we talked about nearly about a year ago, about robotics as a whole, and that was a really stimulating talk. Which is really a follow-up about some of the things that are going to be coming along, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about it. Usual run. So time for questions after that, time for a cup of coffee and a natter, and it'd be good if people get to know each other, because as a forum, the Albany Renewable Energy Forum really seeks to try and bring people together to have discussions. Because certainly the opinion of the board, I think, is that change happens when people who don't normally get a chance to talk to each other and then listen. So this is really the forum aspect is quite important. So this is the talk is the reason to get people out here, but the conversation that goes on around it is also very, very important. But without any further ado, I'll hand over to Gareth because he needs no introduction from me.
Thank you very much, Neil. And delighted to have the chance to speak to you all tonight, and also those online. And as Neil said, this is in a way quite a new topic area, but I'm going to tell a story which kind of shows that it's vested in a diverse past. And I think, particularly from an Orkney perspective, it is something that takes us again into that worldly space of trying to be relevant and think about what is happening in the rest of the world, not just what's happening here. So what I'm going to talk to you tonight about is something that has been created over the last year called the International Blue Economy Robotarium. We call it the Blue Robotarium. And yeah, hopefully at the end of the talk, you'll understand why and how we've got there. So there's two stories I'd like to start with. One is my own personal story, because some of you know I'm a marine biologist, and I'm not particularly au fait with digital technology, as any of the people that have tried to navigate me through working on computers will know. So you're saying, well, why is Gareth up here speaking about this? But interestingly, when I started my professional work as a consultant back in 1987, the very first project that I did with what was then called the IOE in Heriot-Watt University was to do a market assessment for ROVs, for remotely operated vehicles, in 1987, and to map that pathway. And the reason that Heriot-Watt were commissioned to do that is that Heriot-Watt had been instrumental in quite a lot of the technology development that had gone on in the Department of Electrical Engineering. There was a young Turk called Dave Lane, who subsequently has become one of the UK's leading advocates for marine robotics in particular. And the Institute of Offshore Engineering had actually undertaken trials and testing of ROVs in the really early days of it to do tasks associated with the oil and gas industry. So I think I can claim that my robotics kind of heritage goes back to my very first professional job. And the other kind of historical context I was going to give, when just thinking about the wonderful way that Orkney as a community, as a diaspora, and as a supply chain manages to reinvent itself. And the reason I'm thinking of that is that when ITIT came up here in 1990, we were really leaning on the shoulders of the Flotter Oil Terminal and the people that had set up Burger Hill for that. But then there came a kind of decade of when we were looking and exploring the potential for renewables. And then we got to the 2000s and we got EMEC, and we got the community turbine started, and we started putting things in the sea and on the land. And then we get to the 2010s, and we realized that with the constraints, we couldn't just think about energy. We had to think about hydrogen and storage and batteries. And then we kind of realized you couldn't think about that without energy systems. And coming into the 2020s, things like reflex and the way in which we manage energy within our system became a focus. And perhaps because of the pace of change, when this opportunity to look at robotics and data management and AI came along, it seemed one of these next steps where that innovation pathway that we've had for the last 35, 40 years now could be adapted to present circumstances and take us forward again. So what is IBER, or the Blue Robotarium? Well, like any organization, it starts with a vision, and its vision is to explore, develop, and apply 4 things. And I'll go into these a bit more: robotics, automation, AI, and data management. And you're probably all familiar with those terms. Some of you may understand all of them completely. Some of you may be interested in what they contain. So I'm going to explain that. And it's to use those to facilitate the safe and sustainable growth of the blue economy. The blue economy is really thinking about economies around the sea, and particularly in island contexts. And to do that in ways that bring benefits to all parts of society, so it's inclusive, and particularly island and coastal communities. So that reflects the Orkney hefting of that. So that is what the Blue Robotarium is endeavouring to do. So let's just have a look then at these 4 areas. So the first is robotics. And this is just a pictorial guide. You can take from it what you like. But basically, we've got robots on the land, which kind of look something like that. We've also got robots under the sea, which kind of look like that. And there's also robots in the air, as we'll come on to, and in the coast. And everywhere that we look these days, there's kind of automation or robots doing something for us. And increasingly, those robots are going to become more sophisticated and have more applications. But although we might not regularly see robotics, if we think about automation, which is almost a kind of non-humanoid form of robotics, there's many things that are already automated. So when we go on the ferry, it isn't steered by somebody steering, the tiller as it was in the old days. They've basically got coordinates and the boat follows path and there's somebody on watch to make sure it stays there. When we go on the planes, the pilot switches to autopilot within about 30, 40 seconds of going up in the air and takes back control about 2 minutes before landing, or it can be landed sometimes automatically. If you think of some of the cars that are around today, they can reverse park. Some of the more sophisticated ones can actually do journeys. Those of you, if you've got Teslas, some of those models will take you on a journey. You have to have your hands in proximity. So automation is really a key part of our lives already, and it's just going to increase over the next period. Now, this is getting to the edge of my core knowledge, but AI, artificial intelligence, is clearly a mixture of a lot of different things. And I'm not going to pretend today to tell you what it is and what it isn't, but the main message is it's a lot and it's growing quite fast. And those people that are involved in technology think it's going to enable the technology to do things more easily, more quickly, and in a more profound way than has currently been the case. And then underpinning this is really the handling of digital data. And there's so many aspects to data management, and data management is literally you working on your computer at home, trying to sort out your documents and files. It might be the meter that reads your electricity. There's so many manifestations of data. And as data becomes omnipresent, it needs to be managed and handled appropriately. I think it's fair to say if you look at any news bulletin at the moment, there's usually data management part to it. It might be around security or inappropriate use of data. And we've probably, not got a grip on this as an aspect of our collective lives as soon as we should have done. But going forward, data is just going to get bigger. And so either we back off and just say, okay, or we have to get in there and start influencing things. So hopefully those 4 little prompts give you a bit more of an idea about what the Robotarium is, the scope of it, and how broad that can be. What I'd also like you to think about throughout this presentation is the relevance of Orkney to these things. So I'm going to come on to that. But I think in all of your lives, you and your connections and your experiences, you will have something where you can see, actually, Orkney is a good place for looking at that. But before we get back to the local, let's just look at the kind of macroeconomic. And I was looking for something that had a kind of hockey stick graph of growth in these areas to show what's going to happen. But I chose this one because it had these 3 themes of ground robotics, aerial robotics in the air, and marine in the context of AI powered robotics. And what you can see is that the ground robotics are the ones that are greatest at the moment, followed by aerial and then marine, and all of them increase to a large degree over the next 10 years. So we're here at the moment on that journey, and it's going to get much, much bigger. And so in the context of the blue economy, it may be that we're definitely thinking about the orange bit. Because of our air links, we might be thinking about the light blue bit. And because we're islands and we do have land, we're not wet feet. We've got the darker blue bit there as well. But there are other places that are really focusing on this dark blue bit, and much less that are focusing on the light blue and the orange bits. So that's our niche we're trying to find. So what are our 4 proposals? So the objectives behind that vision were that we wanted to explore, we wanted to develop, and we wanted to apply. And as we know, Orkney is really good at not necessarily being the white coat inventors, but we're the innovators and the appliers of technology at an early stage. And so in those 4 areas, we're looking to do that. And indeed, we are already doing it. What we're also looking to do is to combine the capacity of the local supply chain, and the partners that set this up were ICIT, EMEC, Quatera, Green Marine, Lease Marine in Orkney, and then the National Robotarium down in Edinburgh. But that is just the start. It doesn't exclude other people from getting involved. And it's basically to build a cluster around the local supply chain, then look at the unique Orkney ecosystem, particularly in a marine and island context, and the fact that we've got such a diverse coastline with tides, with waves, with calm areas, all the different things that are going on in Orkney, all the different industries make it a very rich ecosystem for testing and demonstrating things. And then linking that with the National Robotarium to create an environment where we can research, design, develop, and test solutions. And through doing that, what we want to do is then capture this idea of leadership and solution finding. And the reason for that is Orkney, as today's event attests to, is a place where innovation in engineering and energy and environment has been key to the economy, and it's been key to the prosperity of Orkney over the last 20 or 30 years. But you can't rest on that laurel. If we stop innovating and we stop progressing, we just go backwards as the rest of the world goes forward. So the Robotarium starts to take us forward into areas which other people are also focusing on. And through that, we can then grow the economy here. We can help other islands look more appropriately at how their economies can embrace this revolution in automation and data. And we can also use facilities like ICIT's teaching base to develop new skills and create new jobs within the supply chain. So I've talked about the blue economy, and it's a bit of an intangible thing, but I wanted to just share with you this graphic, which I think just gives the idea that it's big, it's diverse, and it's blue. So it's anything to do with the sea, and that might be that you can see the sea and you're close to it, or you use the sea for part of the journey. It could be in the sea, it can be under the sea, over the sea. All of that is captured in it. And there's an incredible diversity of industrial activity, like infrastructure activity, human enjoyment and recreational activity, loads of things that are associated with the sea, which create not just economic value, but also obviously social and clearly environmental value as well. That's the scope, or one way of thinking about the scope of things that are embraced by that blue economy. So what we're looking to do is then see how do we blend together all these technological and data solutions and activities within the context of the blue economy in a way which creates benefit for the local communities that are around those places. Again, we could choose just to back off and let Mr. Musk or somebody else come in and sweep up all of that, collect all our data, sell it on to somebody else. Companies come in, exploit all our fish resources and other things and take it all away, and we get left with nothing. So that's not what I'm about. It's not what the people in this organization. It's not what Orkney is about. So Orkney is about, gathering your resources, taking control of it, and making the future as we see it, not as somebody else sees it. And this initiative, as Neil said, was, some of you may have been lucky enough to listen to Stuart when he came up from the National Robotarium and gave us this talk about what was happening in the world of terrestrial robotics. And he showed us some examples of what robots are doing and the numbers. And the one that stuck in my mind, and I've mentioned the man already, is Mr. Musk and his business. It's not just building Teslas, he's building robots. And their business plan involved millions of robots. And that grows like that curve, hugely if they're successful. So if you have lots of little Elon Musks trundling around our society and our lives, that's a pretty frightening prospect. So we either sit back and let that happen, or we kind of confront that and take it on. So a big part of this is, let's react to that challenge and try and be a part of it. So the National Robotarium focuses on 4 areas. It's got a research and development part. It looks at adoption and use of robotics within particularly terrestrial systems, but also in marine systems. It looks at education and training and public engagement. And those 4 things really kind of match quite well the kind of thing we do well here in Orkney. So we sat down with Stuart and we talked about not just what we could do, but what was absolutely fascinating is what we were already doing and what we have done. And so much of that was aligned with what was needed. So when Stuart set up the National Robotarium, they literally had to build a building, recruit people and bring them all together. What we were able to present to him is a group of about 200 people that were already here, about 10 boats, a number of ROVs, all the things that we've got in our community, a drone airport, which I just saw operating this morning. I don't know if any of you have seen the post going to Grahamsey or coming back, but it's quite impressive to see the drone come in and land. So that's just there. We've got a functioning drone postal airport, one of the earliest in the country. So we've got so much here, and I'll come on to that again a bit more. So what we've been really good at in the past is using this combination of geographical location and rich resources, along with kind of innovation and drive for striving to be the best in Orkney to create opportunities. And I think not just in science and engineering, it's in music, it's in art, it's in food and drink, all the different sectors in Orkney kind of are wedded together by those ambitions. And so the location here really blends in really well, we think, with those other areas of activity that make Orkney stand out from other places. So if we then start to take a deeper dive into the kind of areas that Orkney might be able to kind of put a badge on and say, look, we know we're a special place, but we're really good at these areas. There's 6 here. So one of them is around maritime technology. So whether it's boats or tidal machines or wave machines or aquaculture cages or fishing boats, these are things that we can test to the fact that we're at the forefront of and have been on many occasions. Fisheries and aquaculture, just as a unit on its own, is an area where Orkney's waters provide great products, and we have a really strong reputation in those fields for innovation and being at the forefront of activity. Renewable energy, I've mentioned under that maritime technology, but in its own right, the production of energy, the use of energy beyond the technology itself is something, again, that we excel in. And marine research, whether it's biological research, it's social research, it's economic research, all of these things are very prolific across our community, and we can make a case for. And then we have that strategic hub with Scapa Flow as a major harbour. The ferry operations, we have a very high density of ferries, capita, and our shipping, our links to the shipping routes, not just that exist at the moment, but which are going to become much more important in the future. This whole Greenland thing that's cropped up in the last 18 months is basically all about Arctic trade routes. It's dressed up as other things, but that's at the core of it. And some of you will have heard us talk about the Northern Maritime Corridor and what's going to happen as the Arctic ice melts. And what will happen is that trade will happen through the Arctic, and various people have got their eyes on that. But Orkney is a strategic hub, and we're at one end of that pathway. And then the other thing that we have is our community, the strength of our community, the willingness of our community to consider options, look at new futures, get involved in that, and be a part of what that future looks like. So you can ask many people the question, why Orkney? And you can also ask a robot, why Orkney? And I think I kept this simple. They don't like putting videos in it, but this robot actually speaks. If you ask it, why would Orkney be good for a Blue Robotarium? It'll give you this answer verbally out of its kind of memory. So, she puts it that Orkney's quite simple. Orkney has a long tradition of innovation, a diverse blue economy, and an established track record of groundbreaking progress with radical thinking, data management, and technology demonstration. So, have to believe the machine sometimes.
I thought you wrote it. No.
Have a sentence into the internet sphere and it comes out. So let's move on a bit. Having set the scene, hopefully, and given you an understanding of what the Robotarium is, I want to talk a bit more then about what it can do. And I've just repeat the slide. Just thinking about that diversity that's within the blue economy, we then kind of came down to, again, 7 focal points. And this was starting to think about who are the customers that might engage with the blue economy. So one of them would be offshore wind. Now, offshore wind has blown like the wind. It's been coming for us, it's been going away, coming for us. It's been a bit variable, but I think it's fair to say that at some stage, offshore wind will have to be the renewable energy solution for the UK. At the moment, there's a lot of politics and global economics, which is making it difficult, but it doesn't change the reality that if you look at all the list of resources that we've got, strong winds over the seas are by far our strongest resource. So it would be sensible for us to look at that. Sustainable aquaculture, again, it's a totally different sector, but it's really interesting because the government is really seeking to increase, perhaps even double output from aquaculture over the next 5 to 10 years. And as we all know, aquaculture has some issues with it at the moment in terms of sea lice in particular, and automation and better control of aquaculture sites, and perhaps even encasing them so they become closed aquaculture systems rather than open, are all systems that are going to lead to automation, robotic data type solutions being needed. Another area which hasn't particularly touched Orkney in an overt way, but actually we are in a subtle way quite involved with, is decommissioning. So decommissioning is basically taking apart the facilities that are being created for industrial purposes. So there's oil and gas infrastructure on Flotter, and half of Flotter, as the gas processing bit, is now closed down or mothballed. And as a community, Orkney's going to pay quite a lot for the decommissioning of Flotter because that's what the deal said. Part of the 3p fund that we've accumulated is to pay for the decommissioning of that. The robotics and automation could probably help drive down the cost of that and make it more effective and safer if we embrace that. If we then think about just across the water, there's that nuclear facility at Burray, which is still halfway through its decommissioning process. You know, they've been at it for 20 years now, but they've got another 20 or 30 years to go. And although I'm not a fan of nuclear energy, if there's opportunities to kind of use the Robotarium to help that make that safer and more effective, that's probably worthwhile doing. Fishing is something, again, which has been prosecuted in a particular way for decades, but it's likely that if you look at the demographics of fishing, there's much less young people going into it. It may well be that fishing boats in the future are not manned, they're automated. So think about how that could work. Then rural and island resilience and sustainability. There's a number of ways in which transport and communications and many other parts of our lives, energy, etc., food and drink, can all be enabled through robotics, automation, and data use. And then there's the kind of soft side of So if we're going to make that transition, it's not just about buying the kit in, we have to be ready to embrace it. And that involves, unfortunately, training and reskilling of lots of the population. But that's not necessarily bad if it's done in the right way and done imaginatively. We actually all show every day how we can adapt and adopt new skills and understanding. And then the final thing there is about creating local jobs in our economy that are enduring through this next revolution. So the way that we've captured that is then within these 6 boxes. And part of how I put this together is because it's going to go on the internet, and I wanted stuff for people to be able to read. But the kind of issues that we need to look at are safety and risk issues associated with automation. How do we handle that? Is it, and the classic one would be around cars, where you'll hear somebody say, "Oh, I don't fancy being driven in an automated car because it's going to be unsafe." But all of the data shows that you're more likely to be safer and have less accidents when you're being driven by the machine than you are being driven by a person. And let me take, we've all got our own family and friends that drive us, but if you get into a taxi, you know nothing at all about that person, particularly if it's an Uber taxi, and yet we trust them with our lives in the same situation. So it's just something to think about, that we've got our own prejudices that probably color us, but it doesn't mean we should adopt technology willy-nilly, but we need to think about the risks we take already. Another area that we're really interested in as a team is, if you're going to introduce technology into the world that we're in at the moment, you can just do it and see what happens. But we have the capacity now to do what's called digital twinning. So we can create something like SimCity. Some of you might know, some of the gaming applications where you can create civilizations or environments. You can do that in a non-gaming way, but basically simulate our community and then say, what happens if? And test it with scenarios digitally before you go and do it for real. And what we also see is, in the Robotarium context, technology developers can develop a digital twin of their technology and then fly it through the waters, the air, and across the land of Orkney digitally before they come here and do it practically. We've talked about decommissioning, and I've talked about fisheries and those other things. So just to freshen that up a bit, because there's been a lot of words, I was just going to show you some pictures around some of the decommissioning themes we see, not just normally but locally, and the importance of having Caithness and Shetland and the Western Isles involved is that they're not competing with us, and we're not competing with them for this. This could be a regional resource and a centre of excellence, and indeed they can contribute to that. It's not to try and say we know it all to bring them in. So we've got a history of decommissioning, demolition and recovery. And again, just thinking about the innovation, Gapper Flow and the divers were an incredibly innovative group of people that did amazing stuff that's probably never been repeated, may never be repeated, but and the other ones you can see there. In offshore wind, there's a number of pictures here that are kind of selected to illustrate how robotics might be used in offshore wind. And some of your eagle-eyed technology people might recognize this Catamaran, which has been flying around Orkney. Gareth, you used to. Oh, sorry, Mike, yes. With my technology introduction, I'm learning a new skill today. So my glamorous AI assistant, I have a pointer. You ready for it? So, being assisted by digital technology, like showing the catamaran, and I think there's been 2 or 3 flying around Orkney mapping cables for SSE. Interesting little circular loop here is that company was set up by a guy called James Ives, who some of you may remember the name, and he was the CEO of Open Hydro, who had the donut kind of shaped turbine that was in Woolworths for a good decade or so. Previous to that, he worked in F1, so he's obviously a very kind of whizzy kind of guy. But James, yeah, set that company up, and they're now surveying off Orkney with basically automated boats. The other nice story, and an even nicer pointer, is here with Lease Marine's Raptor drilling rig. So this was designed and built in Orkney with a huge input from Elsa, who's our resident kid in Stromness, who we love very much. But she designed that basically, and then the guys built it. So it's a fantastic piece of kit, and that's been used up in the Faroe Islands to drill anchors, which have been used to then fly underwater kites, basically to extract energy from the Faroe Islands. So this picture here is of a machine that was located in Scapa Flow, I think in April last year, and it's a drilling machine that operates remotely, and it was tested for the first time up here, and it worked, and it puts an anchor into the sediment that can then be used for holding things. So I think that's the main Orkney links out of that. Although I should point out there's quite a lot of these things, and Roving Eye recently passed over their legacy of ROV activities to Green Marine as well. So that's still very much alive and kicking here. So lots of things that can go on in offshore wind. Then I also pulled together these pictures of aquaculture and some of the ways in which aquaculture might develop and the opportunities that there could therefore be for robotics and automation. So on our existing systems, we've got the net cleaning equipment up there. Old dogs and new tricks. It's just, and then you've got some of the scaling that might be going on in fish farming, particularly when it goes offshore, and how that is obviously then going to become much more of an automated activity. And then some of the enclosed systems there, you can see not just in the bottom, but here where my wonderful assistant is just pointing the. And then fisheries, loads of things going on there in terms of finding fish, handling fish, catching fish. And as usual, the Norwegians are really far ahead of us in that, but something to be aware of. And we're pretty close to Norway. One day we might be part of a greater Scandinavia, you never know. And then on the aviation side, and I didn't have the opportunity today to get the picture of the drone, but I saw it for real. But there's various ideas that are being put forward, and then the other tests that have been done this year is with this again postal plane that's flying between Shetland and Orkney to take, I think, about 200 kilos payload. So it's getting quite interesting, and occasionally, we've seen cool light aircraft come up in the use of 13 Kirkwall, and I'll come on to that again in a minute. So we'll to disappear for a minute. Thank you. So I mentioned earlier on that when the Robotarium, the National Robotarium came up, we kind of made this point about all the things that we have here already. And this is the table that we pulled together to try and explain what it is we have. So this, we don't need money. We might need money to support this going forward, but we don't need money at the moment to create it. So at the top, we've got all the things that we've done as a master list. Next, we've got some of the organizations that are here, the number of people that are employed in those organizations, the buildings and facilities we've got, the ports and harbors that we have, the boats that we have, the marine tools like ROVs, the data and software, the linkages to organizations, not just nationally, but also across the world. And I'm incredibly proud of Orkney that we've managed to collectively capture all of that. It's the backbone of what we do day in, day out as a whole team. And we can apply that now to this new. And if we just visualize that a bit more, so it's about people and experience. And if you haven't seen the Powered by People exhibition at the museum, please go and see that before it gets taken down this month. But OREF has been at the core of this, mobilizing people. It's great to see you out here again tonight. When I tell people that OREF has basically existed for 25 years, and we've had monthly meetings roughly in those 25 years, and certainly for the last 15 years, we've done these public meetings very regularly, and they've always been supported. There's no other renewable energy group anywhere in the world that can attest to that. So thank you all, and the online ones, for always turning up and making that work. And then when we have visitors like the Transport Minister, we're able to get a flash mob created in 6 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours. And he was just astounded that so many people came out to show off basically their electric vehicle. We've also then got an incredible array of testing and demonstration sites and strategies and methods. So we've got the EMEC, Paul, Wave and tidal sites, but also then the nursery sites. We've also got the idea for the offshore wind site. We've got a compression chamber here, which could provide unique facilities for pressurizing equipment if it was going to be going under the sea to do a dry test, see how pressure resistant it was. We've got the batteries and the hydrogen facilities out on Edie. We've got the Flotter facility, the Orkney Water Test Centre, as it was known, now owned by a company called NOV, but that's tested oil field equipment for 35 years now. We've got the SAIT facility in Kirkwall, and Flotter itself, which is like an experimental test ground just by its scale and the fact it's an industrial site. So we've got all the wind turbines that are already up here, which we could use as test places. So other assets that we've got on the maritime side, all of these boats, unfortunately, the gantry barge is gone, but something like it could be built or bought back again. We've got all the work boats, we've got the ferries, we've got the vehicles here, ROVs, and then I just stuck in the Aquaterra solar boat that we designed and built in the Philippines, and just to show that there's a spread globally of technology. It's not just what we do on these islands, it's what we can do elsewhere. And we'll hopefully come back and talk about that because we got an order for a new demonstration boat and 5 follow-ons. So, and then on the human side, there's the capacity and training side, and obviously ICIT has led a lot of that with maybe 600 or 700 students going through that over the decades, but also other people providing training opportunities and having facilities and procedures and methods and standards that then attract other people to come and learn from us, and that's really important in its own right as well. And interestingly, there's likely to be a revolution in kind of digital training. Like so much training at the moment is all about face-to-face stuff, and that's expensive and quite time-consuming, particularly if you're in a remote area. But with AI and with some of the tools that we've got, you can make remote learning much more immersive. And there's a lady up in the Faroes, for example, who walks around with a head camera on doing wildlife and culture tours of the Faroes. She has an open channel to the people that are with her that day. And so, she's walking along and they'll say, "Oh, that's an interesting person you've got there. Could you go and zoom in a bit more?" And she walks over and engages with whatever she's heard through that. So it's kind of making the best out of digital technology. And then data management. And again, this is something that I think becomes a hidden skill in many organizations because, well, I don't know why, but it just becomes a hidden skill. But particularly I'll call out Kylo here, I think, who were the first company in Orkney that I was aware of that really made speciality out of data management in the community. And I think on the back of that and the people that have been through that organization, we actually have an amazing array of data talented people here at the moment. And so harnessing that and mobilizing that is going to be really interesting and important. So just towards closing is how can we bring these things together? And one of the ideas that we're working on at the moment is this idea of the digital twin. So it's how do you help people understand what the future might be when you can't actually go out and touch it and see it? And so digital twin, if it was good, could have a number of aspects to it. So part of, I was just going to go to the screen, Mike, but I stopped myself.
Oh dear.
I need one of these like cattle prods, as soon as you go like that. So, for example, you could have a navigational simulator within it, which could be on land, it could be in the sea. We actually have a navigational simulator already set up in the Eastside navigational training school, where the model of the Orkney Harbours is already set up, and our pilots and our captains go down there to do their navigational training. So it's interesting, it's set up there, and they'll sail around Kirkwall Harbour or Stromness Harbour or any of the other Isles harbours. So that's one thing that we can have, but that could go underwater. You could be having a navigational simulator for flying an ROV around the wrecks of Scapa Flow, or through the canyons that are in the Pentland Firth, or sandbanks of Sandy, and all of those different things. I've talked about the kind of sim community model. So having a setup within the digital twin that allows you to look at population, look at income, look at jobs, look at how we spend our money, who takes our money, all of those different things. We can have a project development model where if any of you are building a house and you go onto one of these things to look at the rooms and the layouts, it's kind of like that, but you can do that on steroids with wind farms or tidal farms or wave farms, cable routes. Wouldn't it have been great if somebody had done a digital twin of the cable route and the substation before we did it? Just learn all the lessons to be learned. And then we've got a baseline parameters model. So all of this has to be fed. Sorry, I should have gone to the 3D planning first. The 3D planning model is looking at where we do things. So basically, the council's planning, community plan is something that could very much go into a digital twin. There's a marine spatial plan could go into a digital twin. There's other national plans that could do so. And all of these then rely on baseline data and a model which integrates them together. And this is stuff that is already happening in Orkney in many ways. It's just bringing it together and putting it into one solution. So just to give you an example of the power of this, in a little bit of an amusing way. Some of you will have heard me talk about Scapa Flow and potential for Scapa Flow to be a hub where we could be servicing wind turbines and maybe do that with a floating technology rather than a coastal technology. We don't know whether that can happen or will happen, but one of the things that is really helpful is if you can show somebody a picture of it. So I'm not a graphic artist, and I'm very poor at AI, but with very little training and probably not much skill, I was able to produce this as an illustration of what that might look like. And this is produced by Gemini on computer. I think it's on all your computers, just by putting in some descriptors about floating ports and what that might look like. So that's an AI generated image, which to me, it just illustrates some of the power that's there. And by putting things in the mind's eye, it helps us then say, well, I like that, I don't like that. No, but that'll never happen. Yes, we should definitely have it. And that's the kind of input that you get, or feedback that you get from a digital twin, because you can start showing people the reality that might come if we make decisions to go in that direction. So thank you. That's the end of my talk. Happy to take any questions or just discuss any issues that have come out of that, and hopefully it might have explained a little bit about the Robotarium and how it works, and stimulated some thoughts about how we should engage with it in the future.
So, any questions or any thoughts from anybody? I've got one to kick off. I mean, I found this really interesting and really exciting. That's my engineering genes kicking in again. But I just wondered what sort of reaction you're getting. I would have thought the economic opportunities with this are really huge. We've seen the successes that have happened with some of the things that have gone on. I assume you're getting great support from people like Hans Arns Enterprise and the Scottish Government and others about this.
I think it's it's a latent interest at the moment. It's not manifest itself as money, but I mean, this is the reason we put a stake in the ground as Orkney is we wanted to be at the forefront of this. So we wanted to be followers. We wanted to be leaders. And the challenge is when you're leaders is not everybody's kind of got on board with where you wanted to go. So if you're good at leading, you always listen and feedback. So if we're a bit ahead of the curve, and we need to adapt things to make it more palatable, then we need to do that. Part of the reason of coming tonight was you also need to test it with your peers and just get feedback. So I think everybody that we've spoken to thinks it's a good idea. I'm not sure that everybody realizes the potential that it has, and perhaps the urgency that it has. And some of it's up to us to be able to put the resources in to kick it along. But as we all know, I mean, I want to say views that everybody else does. I think what's frightening and fascinating at the same time is the pace and the drama that the world is facing, just obviously this week as well. In some ways, it may seem a long way away, but these things have a profound effect that actually ripples through to all the stuff that I've talked about here. It makes people think about pipelines. It makes people think about resources. It makes people think about resilience and all of these things. So, yeah, that's. So I think it's definitely feels of its time, but we haven't got substantial backing yet externally. The business is interested. And as I say, all of the companies that are involved in this already are effectively trading in this space. It's just we haven't put the badge of the Blue Robotarium on it. And what we're all finding is that as we learn more ourselves about this and think about it more, well, actually, that project, and that project, and that project, they all fit under the Blue Robotarium.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, okay. Then Martin.
And when developing a swimming robot,
to help you swim or to help to swim as the mechanism of movement.
well, it seems to me that if you're in the blue economy, you probably want a swimming robot for certain applications. I mean, a frivolous one might be a lifeguard, but another one might be your robot's working on some platform and it falls overboard and it's got to swim back to the platform.
So I know that there are lifeguard drones operating particularly in places like Australia, and they're often combined with shark detection mechanisms. And I think it's quite, I haven't been to Australia recently, but I've seen that on TV. So that's certainly happening. I think the mechanisms that robots, if you like, have for moving through the water is they can be on the surface or underneath the surface. They can be propeller driven, they can be jet driven, they can be, if you like, arm driven. And there's some innovative things like the gliders, the wave gliders, where it almost uses the reactive mass to create movement as well. So there's people looking at all kinds of redundancy. And so it's a slightly different way of thinking about your question, but I think people are looking at all kinds of movement within the water. And there are already applications looking at the safety of people in the water, whether the drones themselves have a kind of survival, like if you have an aerial drone that drops into the sea, at the moment I haven't heard of anything that's waterproof to the extent that it gets itself going and comes out again. I think it's kind of lost then, but I don't know.
Have seen some small drones that will operate on air and water. They basically fly underwater. Yeah. And they're using the same process they stay in the air, but they actually do that underwater. So, and I've also seen the bit about the safety side of things. I've certainly seen some person lifting drones with basically a life belt on them, fly out and help people out, and take them back to shore or from rivers and stuff. So it's just being able to see these things in a completely different way. Not the problem you're trying to solve. There may well be different. There are a bunch of different ways to deal with solution. The point is that nature never came up with the wheel. The rotary side of things is not that big in nature. Martin and then Drew.
Yeah, one problem I see a lot, see as a big potential problem, is trawling. Because of the damage to the seabed, especially for people that trawl for clams. That was a lot. all bottom trawling will have some damage. But also, trawling can't be done around all the cables that we're putting in, wind farms and so on. Robots could go fish between cables, could avoid all the damage by trawling, and they wouldn't load any fishing grounds because they would be able to go in, hunt down the fish that's the size you want. You avoid bycatch, you avoid bringing up the octopuses and the fish and long that are dead. You can't eat them as they go small. So there's a huge benefit because I think we could increase our fishing catch and do far less damage if we built robots to do that. I wonder, anybody doing anything in that area yet?
Again, we're not, as the Robotarium group are not, but the fishing sector in Scotland, particularly in Norway, is very much looking at that. So they've got nets which I've heard of ones that are still a towed, but they position themselves in the sea depending on the data that they're getting back about the fish that they're chasing or catching. I haven't heard of totally autonomous nets yet, but if you think of
a net, you don't need a net to catch a fish. No, not a big net. You only need one big enough to catch a fish. I'm talking about targeting, going down, having the technology to say that's a good value, or I'll catch that.
Yeah,
that's a cod that's only worth £2.50. I'm going to leave that to grow so it's bigger and like it when it's worth £10.
I did see in Norway was I was lucky enough to go to one of these very big fish farms that was going to go out in the ocean. It was in a kind of ship's tanker shaped hull, and then they had 6 huge cages with hundreds of thousands of fish in them, and then in each of them they had this kind of laser gun, basically, which was about the size of this, and it was tracking fish, and if it saw a sea lice on them, it would zap the lice with 3 bursts of energy and the louse would be dead. But now there's an application of it, but going to Martin's point, you could definitely make that a predatory, like thing where the fish was dead instead of the louse being dead.
Absolutely.
Yes. So it's definitely, I think all those ideas will come.
The way we fish now is the equivalent of going to field the cows and throwing in 3 hand grenades. See what you get.
Yeah.
You might skill lots of things that's not what you want.
Exactly. Thank you.
Well, it's what you do want.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Brew, I think, was next.
Yeah, so I mean, if you had a lobster creel or that walked its way off the slipway and went and hunted, and once they've got a big one, came back on shore, it'd be quite good. I was thinking that it's a huge raft. It's too big in my head. What is possible? There's lots of potential solutions, but it's quite intangible unless it's attached to an actual problem. It seems like a huge sweep of potential solutions looking for problems. And I think to make it more tangible, you need to pick something. Pick something that's commercially viable, pick something to concentrate on, and somewhere to apply all this technology to it. And the problem is that it's expensive and it costs money to develop. And people like Tesla and Elon or Apple or Microsoft or the enormous corporations that have got billions, or Babcock or BAE got billions to spend on R&D, do so, that they have an idea of what they want out of the back end of it.
Yeah.
And without that sort of commercial aspect to it, I did notice on one of the slides it said amount of money invested 1 billion above amount of revenue generated 500 million. Which is, and it's that disparity, I think, that holds it back. I mean, Boeing is a classic example, I suppose, for things like a digital twinning. But a 747 is an incredibly complicated thing, but it's nowhere near as complicated as the tides or the weather or the wind that operates around these islands. And if the Met Office can't do it,
So if you've on a really good point there, and I'm going to try and explain that I think we're trying to do that. And there's 2 ways. The first is and it goes back to that point of recognizing that we are already doing some stuff in this area. Not obviously we're not doing the whole thing, we are testing automated energy machines. They're not fully automated, but if you think about what we do with onshore wind and wave and tidal, and one of the challenges for offshore wind as a sector at the moment is that if they look at their manpower costs for going to service these equipment and the availability of being able to get onto the wind turbines, it doesn't match. And that's one of the reasons why there's a bust on the economics. So if you could test and demonstrate capacity to monitor and maintain turbines on land and develop the technology here where we've got lots of turbines, then you can apply it offshore and we can provide that progression of going from the simple to the more complicated. And I think that progression is something that we have demonstrated again and again. And so you're right that there's huge corporations in America and Silicon Valley and different places where they are. They're not here. And if you think of the industries that they're serving, not all of them, but the ones we're interested in, they're not in California or Boston or China or Japan. The industries are here. So what we need to do is not compete with that part of it, but what we're trying to do is say, when you've got your widget started, come and test it, demonstrate it in our environment, which might be appropriate for the industry that you're looking at. So that's the narrow niche that we're trying to create.
I mean, the dream, I suppose, is to have a large, not just a large language model AI, but a fully autonomous general solution that can do anything. So you invest in that one general solution, and it might have arms and legs. It can dance and it can high skate and do all the things it needs to do. Whereas currently, where we are is they're very, very objective and industry and job specific solutions to do very specific things. And they have to be developed in isolation, really, because that's the limits of the technology as it stands.
And just to come back on that point and this was the rallying call that I think Stuart made for us. If you look at where robotics and automation and stuff is being developed, it's in Japan and then in the US. And basically what he was saying is you either let them get on with it and then you're beholden to whatever standards and they choose to put into their systems, or you try and get onto that journey and go along with them. And I think what we felt as a group is that when we looked at the blue economy, we couldn't compete on the medical healthcare. We had no kind of footprint in there. But when it comes to blue economy, we think that Orkney had something unique to offer. And so we are engaging in opportunities with the NVIDIAs and the Intels, and we haven't gone to Musk yet. And I think we might have a cut-off there.
But you might be watching.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Replace blue sky thinking with blue sea thinking as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to have that.
These are really good points. Any other thoughts or questions?
Brought in copper flow in a workshop. I didn't know these wind turbines at sea could be transported to a central belt for maintenance.
Yeah.
Would that be a godsend to Orkney to have that involved?
I won't be so presumptuous to call it the godsend, but it's definitely technically, certainly the floating turbines are going to need to come inshore to be maintained. So, and as a country, if we're going to have floating wind, we'll need somewhere to maintain them. Orkney, because its geography is closest to all of those turbines than anywhere else, and nowhere else has scapa flow. So there is a natural logic there. And as we all know, scapa flow is big enough to house a lot, but it's already got stuff in it and people value it for different things. So we as a community need to have a discussion about what is the appropriate use of scapa flow in the future. Probably need to engage the Ministry of Defence. They're going to be coming to knock on the door pretty soon to kind of re-establish naval presence up here, whatever that means. And it probably won't be the big ships of the past. It might be quite a lot of automated drones that are going off. But I could absolutely see the Navy happy on Orkney's door to say, look, you are a strategic base, but not for the old Navy. This is going to be for a drone Navy.
we see these wind farms for a short lifespan because of the environment.
Yeah.
So it'd be sensible outlay.
Yeah.
To offer that.
Yeah.
Because that graph that you had on Scapa Flow was ideal because you could accommodate more than one.
No, thank you. I'm glad you appreciated my AI design cousin and the work that came out of it. So.
That's all right.
No, it's great. Definitely. I'm not. It is definitely in the plan.
And there are other pieces as well that we could organise now. So, for example, looking at the aviation side of things, at the moment, my understanding, correct me if I'm out of date with this, is that most of the drone side of things needs to be done within visual line of sight. So when the wind raters were doing flights from Kirkwall to Shetland, the requirement for somebody to stand with a pair of binoculars at Carness and to be able to monitor the fact that the thing went past it and flew out to sea, even though it's got avionics on it that are the same as on an Airbus. Far more than we've got in other aircraft in Orkney. The point is that we need to get the regulation right, and we need to have a relaxation of the regulation in certain areas. So, for example, if we are going to be servicing offshore wind turbines by drone, we need to get the air corridors sorted out. So practicing it now before there's much to crash into would be a really good thing to do. So, going out to sea and coming back to where a wind turbine is going to be and coming back again and proving that works. The same way we're going from here to Ramsey, that sort of stuff. We can do that now. Once you've got an air corridor, somebody will go, well, I've got a drone. Can I come and practice with mine? Yeah, come on in. And that's what EMEC has done, really, in the past. It's had the infrastructure. People didn't really know what they wanted, but it was sort of that sort of shape. So we'll build something like that. And it's nearly right, but we'll tweak it when somebody comes. And they come and they spend money here. And that has been a really good income. It resulted in 200 or 300 people having jobs over 20 years. And there's more of that. There's a lot more of that can be done. Right. At the back.
I have a question about your twin model. So, firstly, you use the word "we" when you're saying we're developing this. Who is we? Is this the Robotarium? Is it Aquaterra? Is it the partner groups? Secondly, who's feeding that model? So, where is the data coming from to feed that model? And then strategically, is that a product of the Robotarium? Is that a resource for the community, for other developers here in Orkney? How do you access that data when it is created? So there's like a mission there. And finally, there's a really good table in there. That one.
Three pieces, yeah. So, where are we? In the digital twin space, because I'm here speaking about the Robotarium, I'm trying to be inclusive of all the people that are here. In that space, Aquaterra is probably the organisation that's led most of that. We have a tool called RadMap, which is a product that we've sold for 25 years, and it basically produces grid square maps of any geographical area. You can put different layers of maps stacked on one another, and then look at the consequences of different actions within that model that you've created. That's quite different to a digital twin of a technology where somebody creates a kind of AutoCAD wind turbine and then it operates, and you look at the wear and tear that there are in different parts. So our model at the moment is a spatial digital twin. But different, I don't know where EMEC are for it at the moment, but some of the data that you've probably got around the hydrogen systems and battery systems would be mini digital twins around those things. The companies that come here with technology, some of them have digital twins of their technology. So there's many different digital twins. And I mentioned that Harbours have paid for a digital twin, at school down in Teesside where they get people sent to. So,
and they've also digitised all the ports wherever they did all the ferry tests for the new old holes they're building.
So, in terms of then, is there a digital twin for Orkney as a whole? Not really. The council also have resources in this area and do a lot of GIS mapping. There's less of the kind of modelling side of it on that side. But actually, when you start, I'm sure if you went to the Health Board or you went into Scottish Water, maybe Scotland, Nature Scott, all of these types of organisations would have digital data sets that would feed into digital. And so where we've applied it most, we would love to apply it in Orkney, but you need somebody then to ask you to do it. We have done a lot of work abroad and in other parts of the world with it, most recently in Indonesia, where we mapped the whole of Indonesia for renewable energy. And it was a 200-metre resolution. And yeah, the government has used that as part of their planning for their net zero pathway. So that's an example of where it can be used. And I'll talk to you about the table later.
Any more for any more? Nobody online, Robin or Braggy, any comments? No? Put your hand up if you did want to. No? In that case, let's pull this to a close and say, Gareth, look, thank you very much indeed for that, as ever. Mind-expanding evening. Even a headache coming out to ORF, which is always a good sign. Yeah, thanks really for bringing this forward. You know how supportive a number of us are about this as an initiative. Thanks, Reggie. A great initiative to take the next step, and as ever, if I just reflect on the fact that it was the fact that people were talking about marine energy before anybody else was talking about marine energy that gave me the confidence to move up here. And it was this sort of presentation on that then which sparked me. So if there's anybody around who's actually thinking about the whole robotic side of things and wants to do more around Orkney, there is already an appetite and a great deal of thinking that's gone on. And Gareth said there are other facilities, and frankly, what we lack is time. And so getting people to be able to get at this as quickly as possible and get on with it is something that I think we've got an appetite to deal with. So just really say thanks once again, Gareth, for opening our eyes, and we look forward to chapter 3 of this. Thank you.